Good afternoon. Testing.
Becky, it's on. It just needs to be turned up.
Good afternoon. Is that working? Can you hear very well in the back? Or will it? No, we need to get it in the back a little better. Don't record, Barb. Good afternoon, everyone. There, I can tell it's on. I'm Becky Hogue, and I welcome you to this first program of the new year. And I think a lot of you must know Karl. How many of you do yoga with him? Oh, yeah, we thought there was. Every program, people bring their own crowd, and we love it. So I usually ad-lib is at my introduction of Karl and mention that we're both Methodist PKs and that we went to Illinois Wesleyan together. But I'm going to read you what he gave me. Before I start, though, in the back table on the left, my left, is a clipboard if you would like to sign up for my email list. I send out a monthly email just telling you what's coming up in the next month. This month we have an extra program on the 30th with Marnie Mamiga. Maybe some of you know Marnie from Batavia. And she's written a new children's book with her artist, illustrator, Mary Parks, and they're going to do another program we added, which was not in our original schedule. So we're really excited, so I hope you come back in 2 weeks. All right, Karl Bruhn. Karl's a longtime resident of Batavia. He was a middle school teacher, mostly history, and all the programs he's done, you can tell he's a real history buff. That's my ad-lib. He was at Edison Middle School in Wheaton for 40 years. When he retired from teaching for about 8 years, he was a volunteer at the Chicago Cult Architecture Center, and he did a wonderful program 3 years ago on the old post office, and gave a fabulous program on that. And that was from his knowledge of being with the center and a docent there. Over the years, he's done a number of talks for Fox Valley organizations, churches, retirement communities, Aurora Women's Club, Batavia Historical Society, and certainly Books Between Bites. One of his favorite topics is anything related to the 1893 Columbian Exhibition World's Fair. His most recent talk here was on the topic of Sears houses. We had a great turnout last year for that, and particularly Sears houses here in the Batavia and Geneva area. For the past 3 years, Karl has moved from being in Chicago to being a docent volunteer at Fabian Villa, or Fabian Family Home, located at the Forest Reserve. How many of you have been there? So we talked, he's a graduate of Illinois Wesleyan and has been a local church musician, mostly church organist, since graduating back in 1972. I was 73. He still plays the organ every Sunday now at St. John's Lutheran Church in Lombard. Today, you're going to hear a bit more about the Fabians and about some of the structures on their property, including the laboratories across the street, those unique buildings. And Karl, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here back and see a bunch of friends and a bunch of people I recognize and things like that. Becky asked me to talk a little bit more about the structures, the stuff that's the buildings and stuff that's on the property. So I'm not going to talk too much about Fabian and Nell, George and Nell, but I will talk a little bit more about the stuff, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there. So, first, full disclosure, okay? I'm old, but not old enough to know the Fabians, okay? So a lot of my information came from this wonderful book. It's called The Fabian Legacy. After we're done, if you want to come up and see it, it's available at the Geneva History Center, and it's got great pictures. So a lot of the things you're seeing, if it's in black and white, It probably came from the internet or the book. If it's in color, I probably took a picture of it. And there was this lady from the years ago, Darlene Larson, that really got the place picked up and cleaned up and all of that. For years, the Fabian Forest Preserve was run by the county, and basically what that meant was they mowed the lawn and cleaned up the trash. Not much else was going on, and the buildings were falling into disrepair. Okay, a little background. George was born in 1867 in Boston, came from a very wealthy family. His family did not want him to do what he did, okay? They wanted him to be a doctor and endowed a seat at Harvard Medical School. His wife, Nell, was born in Wisconsin in 1866, just a little bit earlier than he was. They were married in 1890, and they lived in various places, including Chicago. Now, George had a friend named Frank Lloyd Wright, which probably a lot of you have heard of him, okay? He was born in the same year as George, and I think they had a good relationship because of that. And also Frank Lloyd Wright was born in Wisconsin. So they worked together particularly on rebuilding the house, okay? I found a couple of pictures of George and Nell, okay? It was a really nice couple, okay? There's one of her pictures maybe from high school. Okay, you guys all see that stuff? Yeah. Okay, that was one of her pictures when she got older, and she was just a very attractive lady, and she ran the farm that was there, raised animals and pigeons and all sorts of animals, and was a great socialite. There's a picture of George. This is one of the most famous pictures. That was his hell seat. When he got called to where he was, he'd probably yell at you about doing something wrong, but that was the hell seat that he had. Okay, around, and a lot of these things, we don't know the exact date. Around 1890, they moved to Chicago, and they lived at 3251 South Michigan Avenue. If you go there today, it's a slum. Okay, so don't go, oh, look at that. They lived on Michigan Avenue probably because all of the property on Prairie Avenue were all the really rich guys, like Potter Palmer and Marshall Field, and all of the really rich people lived on Prairie Avenue a block away, and it was all taken, so they moved a block over. Then they bought a farmhouse and 10 acres along the Fox River from Joel Harvey family, 10 acres. A riverbed property grew too, and there's a lot of different numbers on this thing. Some of them are past 600 acres, most of them are around 245, which is what the Forest Preserve District has. But it was a big piece of property on both sides of the river. They named it Riverbank Villa. They purchased it in 1905, and it was built and enlarged in 1907 by Frank Lloyd Wright. We'll start our journey with the big three or big four, the most visible parts of Forest Preserve. It's not necessarily in chronological order or anything like this, but it's by the visible stuff. Then we'll visit some of the smaller stuff. While living in Chicago, they visited the 1893 Columbian Exposition, which was only about 40 blocks from where they lived, the World's Fair, and saw many amazing things. And in those days when you went to a World's Fair, that was it. They had all sorts of stuff that you'd never seen on the internet or on TV or in the movies and stuff like this. People were just amazed, and there were like 27 million people who went to the World's Fair in 1893, and they were some of them. Here's something they saw: windmills. Okay, this is the exhibit of windmills, including the ones from Batavia. They had all sorts of sizes and styles and all of that, and they probably planted in the back of George's mind, I want a windmill someday. Okay, so that's just part of the exhibit that they had. Now, the Fabian windmill is the most visible part of the estate. You can see it from a long way away as opposed to the other things on there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful building, windmill, okay? They fixed it up in about 1990, and they have tours there. It's just great. There's the sign you can see and drive in. There's a parking lot right there, King County Forest Preserve District. It's open on Sundays, usually from noon till 3, and there's a phone number. You can call it up or look it up on the internet and figure out if it's open this day. And they do have private tours and stuff. I was fortunate to be able to go on one, and it was great, okay? There it is. It tells you a little bit more about it, and they ask for a $2 donation, and you go, big deal, okay? Just a very photographed piece of structure. It's probably one of the most photographed things in the Fox Valley through different times of the year, but it's great. There's a picture from the 1916 dedication of the windmill, and the second person from the left is Nell, and the third person from the left is George. They had a party to celebrate the building and opening of the windmill. Was moved to the site around 1914. It had originally been in New York Center, which today is Lombard, and it goes back to the 1840s. It was, a long time. When George bought it, he bought a used windmill, okay? After having it dismantled and transported to Geneva, and they had to reassemble using only the best materials, and he was really particular about the materials that they used. 68-foot windmill contains 5 levels, one of which could be used to house the millwright. The basement is distinguished from other windmills as it was built with a bakery. Other windmills around the country and in Holland and other places don't have a bakery in the basement. He wanted it because he liked fresh bread. Okay? And his workers would tell him, they said, you can buy fresh grain in town for 1/9 of the price of it costs to make it here. He goes, yeah, but ours is fresh. So there's a schematic drawing. You can see the different levels. Okay, it's got the big the mill, the blades at the top, which can, not anymore, but could spin around to face whatever direction that the wind was coming from. It can do it, but I don't think they do it because it's just too much work to do it. And if you look, you can see the tubes and stuff that go up and down and from different layers to this. And then if you get down to the bottom layer, you can see the chutes where the stuff comes out. If you were grinding corn or wheat or oats or whatever you wanted to grind, it came out at the bottom. And then the very bottom level is where the baking section is. Now here's what it looks like inside. It still looks like this, okay? And different kinds of stuff coming from the mill. The mill stones are upstairs. Here's some of these examples of stuff that they have done, okay, to make bread. Here's the oven where they cook the stuff. Because the building is made out of wood, they had to be really careful. So they got the coal in the kitchen from the chute on the outside. It came from Sterling, Illinois, the best fuel chute. Now, I don't know about you, some of you guys are pretty young out here, but I remember when we had a coal furnace in our house, and you couldn't complain to your dad. You go, Dad, it's cold in here, and you go stoke the coal, And so I learned how to put on thicker pajamas or something like that. Yeah, but that was one of the places. My house is old too, and we had a coal furnace in it once upon a time, long before we lived there. Okay, now what do you do with the stuff from the oven? Well, they had to have a place that was safe. So on the side of the windmill, they had a chimney. It's not there anymore. A lot of the stuff you're going to see today is not there anymore, but it was safe then, so you didn't burn down the windmill. And if they made some extra, which they did, they sold it in bags, and this is what the bags looked like. Now, in 1960, the U.S. Postal Service, back when stamps were 15 cents, can you imagine that? Okay. They honored 5 windmills in the United States, including the one at Fabian Forest Preserve. And there's a first aid cover. Some of us used to collect things like that, and so there's one at the museum. Right? It's a beautiful place in the wintertime. People can go sliding. I did that for a long time with our kids and now grandkids, but it's beautiful. The hill is just the perfect slope, and back in the old days, people had sleds. Now they have these round things that they do, which crashes into each other and all of that, and you can scream a lot, but that's it. Okay. Now, they had more than one windmill. Here's one that was part of Nell's office, okay? Now, here's a drawing of the estate. You can kind of see what it's like. On the bottom part is the stuff on the east side of the river, and this drawing doesn't show it very well. But they had a couple 100 acres on the east side, plus the west side, plus the island, and There's a bridge that we're going to talk about in a little bit that's there, and you can see, well, it doesn't work too well if you have two screens. On the left-hand side, kind of in the middle is where the Chinese garden is, okay? The villa is near the top. Across Route 31, you can see where the laboratory is. It was an amazing place. To the bottom left-hand side, off the edge of the map, kind of where Fabian Parkway is now, they had their own stone quarry, which was, this was an independent farm that raised everything that they possibly needed. There's the stone quarry, which is no longer there. When they built the wall on Route 31, the stone from the villa, from the riverbank, was of a quality that was really good for making concrete, cement, things like that. The wall along Route 31 was made of stone from a guy's farm in Batavia that was not, was stronger stone. Okay, so it was better quality. So even though they had a quarry on their own property, it wasn't good enough for the wall, but it was good enough for the walks and things like that. At the Columbian Exposition, Fabian saw lots of interesting exhibits, including, I wonder how they got these pictures back in the old days, but there's a lot of pictures from the World's Fair that are pretty good. And if you look over at the left-hand side, here's something that fascinated Fabian and his wife. It was a Japanese garden, okay? The different countries at the World's Fair sent over stuff to show. And one of them was a Japanese garden, and Fabian's decided they, and a lot of other wealthy people, had to have a Japanese garden because they saw one at the World's Fair. And there's a Torii gate. Darlene Larson and her friends really got the garden cleaned up and fixed up, and they're still working on it. It's just an amazing place. Probably a lot of you have been there. If you haven't, you really need to go there. There's a thing that tells you when the hours are, and it opens again probably in May of this year. There's a list of rules, and it's a great place. When King County Forest Preserve District took over the property in 1939, they really did not keep it up, and the Japanese garden fell into disrepair. Thanks to the work of Darlene Larson, Japanese garden is now looking really good. Here's a few pictures from it. They always had a fence on the outside. Okay, and you can see the Half Moon Bridge and one of the lanterns. Okay, famous bridge. A lot of flowers and just greenery. It's a great place. There's one of the 5 cement sand cast lanterns. Sylvia Silvestri, who was an artist, a cement artist that worked for the Fabian family for a number of years. He made it. He made a lot of the things around the property there. You all see Mount Fuji? Mount Fuji is not a very tall mountain, so when they made Mount Fuji, they covered the top with white cement, so that's supposed to represent Mount Fuji, even though it's, it doesn't stick up like Bald Mountain or something. Okay? But there's the fence in the yard and some of the flowers. Once upon a time, they had a beautiful tea house inside there, and they do the tea ceremony and just have a grand old time. This is the only picture I could find that has this unusual Japanese garden, a zigzag bridge in the bottom right-hand side. They didn't want a straight one because it was bad luck, so you'd have a zigzag all over the place, and it was neat. Above to the right, there's the villa, so you can see how close they are. They had a Japanese landscape architect, Otsaku, come and do their Japanese garden and a lot of other Japanese gardens of wealthy people, mostly on the North Shore, after the World's Fair. He had 2 addresses, one on Michigan Avenue and one in New York City. I saw this one place that I can't confirm it. I wish I could find another thing that says that his fee for designing their Japanese garden back then was $25. Just amazing. This is the family, Kobayashi, that maintained it for a bunch of years. They were here and gone and came back again, but a really good, loyal family that maintained it for a while. Other curiosities, okay? Here's the railroad line that went through their property. This is on the west side, north is to your left. It was part of the interurban railway going between Aurora and Elgin. A lot of people took it, and some of them got on and off there. Some people lived on the property of the villa, but that was one of the railroad lines. On the west side, on the east side, there's a railroad line from the Chicago Northwestern Railroad that went through their property. That's where the Prairie Path is today. And this one is where the Prairie Path is kind of. You can get on here and go down south, but it won't go farther north than the Fabian property. There's one of the stations that they had in the old days. There were 2 of them on their property. They had a lot of other interesting stuff. Okay, they had an aviary cage with tropical birds and peacocks. Even had an ostrich for a while. The ostrich didn't do well in the wintertime. They had a monkey cage. Okay. They had the bear cage. Molly was the bear that they had, and all the kids in the neighborhood loved it. The villa, the property was open, especially on Sundays, that you could come and check out all the animals and things like that. Colonel Fabian just wanted you to stay on the walk, don't walk on the grass. Okay, but the bear and the monkeys were big hits that they had. Okay, the bear cage is still there. Some of you probably have been there. Some of you probably had a picnic there. Okay, so it does have a roof on it now, just in case there's a rainy day. Forest Preserve District is enjoyed by some folks who just like to relax in nature. Just go out there and just relax. I got this guy at 7 o'clock in the morning once, in the fall. Okay, the Fabian Villa. Now we've done a windmill, and this is like the next big structure. It was the home of the Fabians from 1905 to 1939. It was remodeled by Frank Lloyd Wright and enlarged in 1907. It changed from a simple farmhouse to a modified prairie-style house. And prairie-style emphasizes horizontal left to right stuff all over the place. Okay. An aside about Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright apprenticed with Louis Sullivan of the Sullivan and Adler firm. They designed their most famous building that's still around is the Auditorium Theater in Chicago. A grand auditorium. Probably some of you've been there. If you haven't, it's great, and it's used and all of that. Then he opened his office in Oak Park in 1893, year of the World's Fair, and he took the Chicago Northwestern train to Geneva, which was around for many years before at the World's Fair, to work with his clients out here. There's stories that when he came out to Geneva and Batavia in those days, Frank Lloyd Wright would take the train to the Geneva station, and then he got on a horse and rode a horse from the station down to the property. Okay. Frank Lloyd Wright had a disagreement with Sullivan, who was a genius of architecture, and Adler was a genius of acoustics. Okay, and supposedly he got fired. Frank Lloyd Wright did, because he moonlighted, which Sullivan didn't like that. Okay, now there's 3 houses in the valley here that are Frank Lloyd Wright houses that were built. Bing, bing, bing. Here's the Holt House, built in Geneva in 1905. Still there. Okay, there's a fireplace. You can see the big chimney in the middle of the house. Frank Lloyd Wright liked large rooms, open spaces. There's their house a couple weeks ago. Okay, it's got a big fence. Trish does not want visitors. Okay, I got lucky and I got in, but she said no, she's not interested. And there, when you get past the fences, it's got one of the big Frank Lloyd Wright things is these huge overhangs in the house. Here's the Gridley Ravine House in Batavia, built the year after the house in Fabian Villa. By this time, Frank Lloyd Wright was making more money and was more expanding, and the houses were getting bigger. But you can see all the east and west, the horizontal lines that were part of it. And you can see their urns that are a big part of it. Okay? Here's the villa. If you're coming from the parking lot, you got a lot of steps to walk up, but there it is. It's just a gorgeous place. Okay, a few characteristics of a Frank Lloyd Wright house. Low-pitched roof, projecting eaves. A courtyard-style fence We'll see these in a minute. Square urns at the corners, you'll see that. Uninterrupted string coursing or trim inside and outside the house, you'll see that. Casement windows grouped into horizontal bands, see that. Outrigger type of verandas, you'll see that. And then inside, because I'm not taking the inside of the house, a lot of built-in benches, a screen of windows with diamond-shaped glass, particularly in the second floor, a wooden privacy screen in the dining room. If you go to the villa house, this is really neat. In the dining room, where they had, Nell didn't like big crowds. The most people he ever had for dinner was 20, okay? And they had visitors all the time. But on the side between the dining room and the kitchen, there's a wooden screen that it separates the room, and the servants could walk back and forth behind that and not interrupt the people, but they also knew when it was time to clear the plates and bring the next thing. So that's a neat thing to look at if and when you come see me, I'll show it to you, okay? There's some of the urns in the windows and the overhang, and there's the villa opens again. This is from last year, so it's around May 1st, and it's open till October. Now, one of the things about the villa that's really neat, and with some other Frank Lloyd Wright houses, but this one in particular, is where's the front door? You can walk around and go, I don't know. Does that look like the front door? He was a sneaky guy. You can see the windows there like that, and the outdoor, the veranda things, but that's the front entrance. Even though you look at it and you go, oh, looks like a back door, side door, something like that. Here's some of the urns. You can see the overhang, the windows. When they redid this place, Frank Lloyd Wright would roll over in his grave. He hated downspouts. Okay, so in his houses, like the Ravine in Batavia, and a lot of the houses in Oak Park that he did, the downspouts were on the inside. And then when they leaked after 50 or 60 or 70 years, you had to tear out the walls to get in to fix the downspouts. So that is not original. He would not have liked that. But when you redo something and it's the county that's paying for it, the preservation partners, you do those kind of things. Okay? But neat outside verandas, porches on 3 sides. There's your urns, nice flowers. It's just a beautiful, beautiful building. If you haven't been there, it's right here. Go over and see it. Then they had a lot of ponds near the villa, okay? And then next door, just right, would have been to the left of the house, right there, Jack Williamson was the sailor and the nautical guy in charge of everything. And one of the things he taught was knot tying. He was a sailor, and he tied knots together. So he made this for Nell, this neat spider web. And it would be really neat if they could do it again, but I don't think insurance would allow it, okay? But it was really cool. To the left at the bottom, there's one of the houses. They had a number of houses on the property. The villa did not have like guest rooms, okay? If they had guests, and they had a lot of guests, they got to stay in their own little houses along the place. And there's a couple left, but not very many. Some of you might remember, like there was a scout house and all these other things, but a few left. And there's a picture of Jack on the bridge. Behind it is the Roman pool. We'll see more of that, and a wooden bridge. We'll talk about the bridge that was there, too. Several other outdoor curiosities are on the property. The Fabians were serious collectors of stuff. Lots of stuff. George used to buy unclaimed train cars full of stuff that he didn't even know what was in it. And he had a building on the east side of Route 25 called the Museum of Junk. Musée de Junk. Okay? Sounded kind of neat, but you know, he collected stuff. Nell collected stuff. There's a huge collection, if you go in the villa, of eggs from hummingbirds and ostriches and stuff like this, and it's still there. And they were collectors, and a lot of it after she died in 1939. Her sisters got the property, and they had a sale of furniture and everything just to get rid of so much of the stuff. Okay. Sylvia Silverti was a concrete sculptor from Geneva. Later he moved to Chicago. And there's several sculptures still on the property. They're kind of falling apart. Okay, there's a couple of them there. There's off the side from the villa. Okay, there's this neat chair. Okay, and it has toes on it and stuff like that. Just was really kind of good. They have found some more of his stuff, and it's in the garage. And we'll get to that in a minute. And this year, this summer, when they open it up, they're going to take some of his pieces that are not like in decrepit condition and bringing them out. So there's one of his pieces. There's this neat like sofa, and it's got kind of a motif. You probably recognize it, you know. That doesn't look like Illinois. There's one of the bugs from one of the tables. Do you recognize the motif? Okay, why did the Fabians like this particular style of design? It was popular throughout the country, all over the country. Why? Well, there's a guy from Britain named Howard Carter who had a wealthy patron, George Herbert, started in 1907 looking for stuff that hadn't been discovered yet in Egypt. Napoleon was over in Egypt when he was in power and stuff like this, and they were always digging up stuff. But Howard Carter was looking and looking and looking, and in November 1922, this is the month before George Herbert cut off his funding. He said, "You're not finding anything. I'm not going to pay you any more money to be digging around." The month before that happened, Carter he was walking cane in the ground and hit something. And they started to dig around it, and they found King Tut's tomb. Okay? And they were over there for a couple of years, taking pictures very, very carefully, pulling it apart. Okay? This is a picture from when his tomb stuff was on tour of Chicago back in about 1992, I think it was. It was at the Field Museum. Some of you might have gone down there to see it. They had about 40 pieces from his tomb that was on tour all around the United States. And Chicago was the second city that had it. Okay? All over America, including Geneva, DeKalb, Hollywood, people were excited about things Egyptian, including, some of you have probably been there, the Egyptian Theater in DeKalb. Maybe some of you have been to this place, Grauman's Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. It's still there. Okay? And around the country, there's still a bunch of Egyptian stuff. Here are several other cement sculptures still on the Fabian property. Okay? A globe. The ducks, he's got a couple of ducks there that are just really neat. These were made out of cement, and Nell helped make these things. She was a hands-on person. She just didn't sit and watch and say, "Okay, I'll pay you to do this." She liked to do it. And they came up with a kind of a mix that nobody's been able to figure out what it was. Today when they're doing repairs on these things, they go, "We don't know how to do it," okay? But it included some silicone in it, which had a little bit of a sparkle to it. And it's just really neat. If you go to the villa, the next time you go to the villa, you can see they had separate bedrooms. She was on the first floor, he was on the second floor, okay? Her bathroom is really kind of neat because there are no faucets with your hands, because it was in the days when people got all sorts of diseases and stuff. So you controlled all the faucets with your feet or your knees, okay? And the floor of her bathroom is one continuous piece of concrete with a drain in it, and the walls are concrete. And you go, don't you think they could get tile that looks a little bit nicer? Well, that's part of the reasons why they did it. Very happy duck. Then another one of the statues they have is Chief Black Hawk. Okay, they had statues all over the place. There's, he's by Route 25 near the entrance to the windmill. People go by it and never see it. And a lot of stuff at Fabian, you go by and you don't see it. The Colonel loved eagles, so there's a bunch of eagles around the place. He was very patriotic, very patriotic. At 7 o'clock in the morning every day, they'd raise the flag, and there was a bugler out there blowing his bugle. And at evening, at sundown, they were out there blowing taps. So he was very patriotic and helped tremendously with classes in World War I. for girls to be nurses, for the soldiers, and for the guys to get training in trench warfare. North of where Houghton Mifflin is today, that was part of their property, okay? They dug trenches, and they had practice sessions from Geneva High School. The high school superintendent thought that was a good idea, because some of you are probably going to get to be a soldier. So they didn't go off cold into the war. Okay, housing for guests and some workers existed on property, including a number of forms. Here's one of the ones that's there. It's still there. Unfortunately, it's abandoned. It had a steam boiler in the basement, and when they let the place go, the boiler broke, and all the radiators and stuff don't work, and they're in the walls. And I doubt if they'll ever fix it, but that's one of the houses for guests that's right down the hill from their house. And then there's stone walls all over the place. Okay. There's the main stone wall. It's about a mile long. This is the one with a stone from Batavia, because their quarry didn't have such high quality big pieces of stone. Then in the distance you can see the garage. Okay. Fabians were major collectors, and today inside the villa dining room, this is the only inside thing we're doing today. Okay. There's a piece of art from the 1893 Columbian Exposition World's Fair. A lot of the fine art at the fair was housed in a building, the Palace of Arts, which eventually in 1931 became the Museum of Science and Industry. Okay, there's a guy named Julius Rosenwald was the guy that funded that place. Sometime I'll do a talk on Julius Rosenwald. He was the first president of Sears Roebuck after Sears was around, and he's the guy that made the money for Sears Roebuck, Julius Rosenwald, and he gave the money for the Museum of Science and Industry. Unlike the Field Museum, which has the name Field, Marshall Field on it, he didn't want his name on it, because when he wanted to do fundraisers, nobody gave Marshall Field's money. They said, your name's on the door. You're rich, you pay for it. Julius Rosenwald said, no, we'll do fundraisers to do the different things. So anyway, the Palace of Fine Arts became the Museum of Science. I mean, after the fair, a lot of the artwork was loaned to the Art Institute. Now somehow, I don't know how this happened, Colonel Fabian, somewhere around 1917, acquired the statue of from the sculptor E. Edwin Elwell. The statue is known as Diana and the Lion. This is inside the Museum of Science and Industry at the World's Fair. Different countries were friends of each other back then, and they gave paintings and sculptures and stuff. And they had a whole building full of this. They only gave it to the World's Fair to use on the condition that it had a significant, strong building to make sure that, if there's a tornado or a rainstorm or something, that the artwork is not going to get wrecked. No, you know the story. The rest of the museum, the rest of the World's Fair, burned down, was torn down, was vandalized, and all that sort of stuff. The one that's still there is the Museum of Science and Industry, and this was the Museum of Art back there, Palace of Art when they were there. The Diana and the Lion are on the right-hand side there. Okay, big marble, not big, nice size. Fabian liked it, and when it became available, he bought it. And where did he put it? In his dining room. Okay, so if you go to the villa, there you have a naked lady in the dining room with a lion. Okay. The Roman-style swimming pool was built around 1915 on the island. The island was nicknamed the Isle of View. Now, if Fabian was tardy for dinner or something like this, he'd always tell his wife he was on the Isle of View. Say that with me 3 times fast. Isle of View, I love you, I love you. All right? So he got off of being in a hot seat by doing that. Okay? Yeah. As this was a Roman-style swimming pool, it had curved sphinx, benches, columns all around, and a diving board. That was not Roman-style. Romans did not have diving boards. The water came from a natural spring, and it was reported to be rather cold. The pool had many leaks, and eventually it was removed. Now, Jack, the sailor, was in charge of the pool, and he tried all sorts of things back in the 1930s to plug the leaks. and he'd do it, and it'd plug the leak for a week or two, and they think it's because the ground was shifting under the pool, so it just kept leaking, so they eventually just closed it down and tore it out, but that's what it used to look like. Nice columns around it, and on the bottom right-hand side, you can see the diving board. There's some of their friends, Nell and William Friedman and Elizabeth Friedman. And we're going to talk about those two in just a little bit. You can see the windmill in the background. But it was a nice place, and it was open to the public. If you wanted to go over there, it was open. This is one of two pools that they had, okay? This is the other pool. This was for the employees, the regular employees, okay? They had somewhere between 60 and 100 employees almost all of the time. Sometimes it would go past 100 because they had like a big farm there, and they had a lot of maintenance workers and gardeners and stuff like this. So that's the thing. And on the right-hand side on the edge, you can see there's the windmill. So that's where it was on the east side. It's not there at all anymore. So, okay, the garage. It's built in 1912. Colonel had a sign put out in front of the garage to let people that he owned a collection of cars. He did not mind showing off, okay? His collection included a Rolls Royce, a Stevens Dura, a Bentley, 2 Cadillacs. One of them was Nellie's Roadster. She loved it, okay? A turntable turned the cars around to face the street, the Lincoln Highway, which is where it still is. The Lincoln Highway goes right by our library here too, okay? And it was one of the earliest automobile turntables installed in the U.S. It was just, he had 2 for chauffeurs. It was just too much work to back out onto the Lincoln Highway back in 1912, when there were probably 3 cars a day. But let's just show off to your neighbors. We've got a turntable, so you're always driving straight out. The garage was even heated, so the guys could wash their cars in the wintertime when there probably wasn't any salt on them in those days, okay? His chauffeurs were Bert Williams, who was with him for years, and Alva Moracle. They lived in the upper story when they were bachelors. When they got married, then they moved out, but it's a neat place. There's Nell with one of their dogs. Bert Williams was driving, and the chauffeurs in the old days had boots and hats and coats, and pretty nice job, okay? The license plate probably means something, but I don't know what, okay? There's the garage, it's still there. They've replaced the sign, you can see it, drive by it. Storage now for the preservation partners. On the side, you can see what they had, and then to the right is where she had her carrier pigeons. She had a couple hundred carrier pigeons, which she donated to the government during World War I, so they could send messages and things like this. They did an experiment. They had carrier pigeons. They released them out in DeKalb. They all got back. Then they go, well, let's try a little bit more. And Colonel Fabian, loved experiments having to do with science. So they took them out to Rock Island and let them go. And they all got back. So carrier pigeons were one of their things that they really enjoyed doing, okay? 1912 was an important year for the Fabians and many others in the U.S. because the year a fellow from India named Karl Fisher started. You ever heard of Karl Fisher? You ever heard of the Indianapolis 500? That's his, okay? Started an organization to organize some national leaders between improving transportation between cities. Before that, people traveled mostly between cities by boat or train. If you went from New York to San Francisco, the shortcut was to go around South America in a boat, okay? Yeah, then in 1867, they finally got the first transcontinental railroad across the United States, Promontory Point, Utah. But roads between, the towns had roads. Some of them were lucky and had brick roads, and some of them had macadam paving, which is crushed limestone. But connecting the towns, it was dirt. It was just not a big deal because people didn't travel much. Well, Karl Fisher came up with this idea called the Lincoln Highway. And roads between the cities, they didn't really connect until the Lincoln Highway Association was started in 1913. And Colonel Fabian bought one of the original shares because it went right past his property, okay? And if you were bought into it, a share back then was $5. Okay. Karl Fisher was hoping to raise $15 million because he was convinced he could build a highway across the country from New York City to San Francisco for $15 million. He missed. It wasn't finished until the 1930s, but there were markers all along the road where it was or where it was going to be built. But Colonel Fabian was one of the initial guys, and I think this should be hanging on the wall in a very prominent place, but it's in a bookcase hiding and stuff like this, but he was one of the originals. Okay, the bridge and the lighthouse. That's the bridge that's there now. When the colonel was there, he wanted to build a bridge across the Fox River because he had a farm on both sides of the river, and it was just easier than going through downtown Geneva to get to the other side. The Fabian Parkway Bridge wasn't built. So he applied to the government, the Army Corps of Engineers, to get a permit to build a bridge. And they just flatly turned him down. Said, no, the Fox River is navigable. And he goes, it's not navigable, it's 4 feet deep. You know, it's crazy. You know, you're not going to do that. So George Fabian, Colonel, called up his friend, Teddy Roosevelt, who also came to town and stayed at their villa, okay, who was the president, and said, can you help me out? I'd like to get permission to build a bridge across the river here. And Teddy monkeyed around really quickly with Congress, and there's different stories. It took a day or a week, but George got permission to build a bridge. Okay. Now, to make fun of the government, he put a lighthouse on it because it's just totally just for fun. It's a joke. Okay. Now it would blink 2, 3, like dee 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 dee. And I think that's how Geneva's telephone exchange got to be 232. I'm not sure, but I think that's a possibility. But the lighthouse is there, and we don't have any big barges or anything going down the river, but it's really nice. Okay, beautiful piece. Okay, now the acoustic labs are on the other side of the street, and it's just a fascinating story about it. Oh, in the top right-hand corner to the right of the acoustic labs, okay, is where the trenches were. That Fabian had the trenches built so that the kids, high school kids, instead of going to gym class, could go there and practice heavy warfare. You can see some of the other things that are there. Okay. There's 3 things on the west side of Lincoln Highway, Route 31. On the right is the lodge. Okay. It's still a lodge. A family lives there that bought it and fixed it up. There's another windmill you can see. Then there's the engineering building, and then the acoustical lab. 3 different buildings that are not part of the Fabian Parkway anything anymore. Once upon a time they were. Fabian had these built. Okay. There's a riverbank lab complex with a windmill, okay, and an eagle. Both of the laboratory buildings, a tuning fork factory and acoustic laboratory, and they made tuning forks there for a long time, not just for music, but for medical reasons. Maybe you've gone in to have your physical done, and a guy has a tuning fork and puts it on your knee or your ankle. Can you feel that? You know, or by your ear? Okay. Were built by Colonel Fabian to further his scientific interests. He loved studying stuff. Okay. The lodge was the living quarters of the head researcher Elizabeth Wells Gallup, her sister Katie Wells, and their staff. We'll get to them in just a minute. They were hired by Colonel Fabian to research the codes of Sir Francis Bacon. Fabian was interested in the theory that Shakespeare writings were actually written by Bacon. And he funded these ladies and others to do research on it based on the size and the looking of the different styles of type that were used in the old days and stuff like this. So that's Elizabeth Wells Gallup and others. Okay. The lodge, in 1910, functioned primarily as a guest house for the Fabian visitors and employees. Elizabeth Friedman, you'll hear more about her in a minute, stayed there in her first few nights in Riverbank to lend and let has it that the guest and has it that Teddy Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, Japanese royalty, whose name I can't pronounce, may have stayed in there during their visits to Fabian. A windmill and a greenhouse were adjacent. Okay. Elizabeth Friedman continued the study of the Francis Bacon theory that Fabian thought was great. She grew up in Michigan, was a school teacher and hated it. So she came to Chicago and was at the Newberry Library in Chicago. And her dad told her she's got like enough money for 2 more days and it's time to get on a train and come home. Well, she was talking to somebody at the library, the Newberry Library, about this interest that she had in Shakespeare and Sir Francis Bacon. And he said, I know somebody that might be interested in what you're interested in, George Fabian. He had a phone back in those days. When you go to the house, you got to look and see if you can find where the phone was. Frank Lloyd Wright did not want a telephone out where you could see it, so they hid it in a column. Okay. So anyway, the librarian called, and Fabian arrived like in a couple of hours in his limousine and said, I've got a job for you. Would you like to come with me? Okay, and you go, she's a young lady from Michigan. Who's this guy that says, hop in my car and I'll take you to my house? But she did, and she worked for him for a number of years. Okay, Elizabeth Friedman. Okay, during World War I, Colonel Fabian volunteered to have his code-breaking staff to work for the U.S. government and held a code-breaking school of Army officers at his own expense. William Friedman, who became Elizabeth's husband, was called the Dean of Modern American Cryptologist and was the director of ciphers and genetics, raising crops at the Riverbank Labs during this period. They were doing all sorts of research on how you can make crops, like one of the good ones is corn. Most of corn stalk is waste. All you want is the cob. And they did research on how to make it shorter so you don't have so much waste. And he was one of the guys doing that. Because of this history, some of the Riverbank laboratories are considered to be the birthplace of the National Security Agency, which is still in existence. It started at Fermilab. There's a picture of the lodge. Okay, it's not open to the public, but people that live there have funded a lot of stuff, and they've rebuilt the lodge. Okay, and I don't feel comfortable telling you their names or anything like that. Okay. So ever heard of anyone who worked here? Well, there's Elizabeth Smith Friedman, cryptographer. She turned out to be pretty significant and famous, and she was part of the research thing with Francis Bacon, and she worked for Elizabeth Wells Gallup. And I don't know whatever happened to her, Gallup. She just left. Maybe she was outshined by the other Elizabeth. Okay. One of the things that Friedman did was break the codes. You recognize this guy? Al Capone. Yeah. Okay. Al Capone had a bootlegged industry that he brought, like illegal, among other things, alcohol, but he also bought perfume and farm crops across the border at night. And they had teletype and telephone things going on. And she broke Al Capone's code. And because of her, who worked at Fermilab, Al Capone went to jail. Okay? She also broke the code of the German submarines in World War I that were torpedoing American and British ships and sinking them. So she broke the code so that we knew where the submarines were and went some other direction. So this lady was really great. There's her, she and her husband. William was kind of funny because he came from Russia in the days of the Tsar, but he was Jewish and his family was picked on, so they moved to Brooklyn and then eventually moved to Chicago, and they hit it off and were married for years. Okay, and so he was in charge of ciphers and the raising of crops. She just worked with stuff. Here's one of the books that's about her, The Woman Who Smashed the Codes. I've got a copy up here if you want to look at it later. It's a really interesting book. And then they turned the book and her story into a thing called The Code Breakers. It's a PBS video, and it's well worth watching if you get a chance to see it, because it's just amazing how they put these film clips together. There they are after they moved to Washington, D.C., and they moved the National Security Agency to Washington, D.C., and spent the rest of their lives out there. Okay. The Acoustic Lab, 1918, the Sabin Acoustical Lab was designed for William Wallace Clement Sabin, a pioneer in architectural acoustics research back when it was kind of new. And it was the first reverberation chamber built in the U.S., and it's still there. Wallace Sabin had two distinguished titles. He is acknowledged as the father of the science of architectural acoustics and the first modern-day acoustical consultant. Okay, so what did they come up with? Well, they came up with an improved style of fiberboard or plasterboard. Okay, in the old days, rooms had terrible acoustics. They'd have echoes or they'd be dead, and you couldn't really. They just didn't have a way of doing it. Plaster just was terrible. He went to Harvard, and he was disgusted because he couldn't hear very well in his lecture classes because it echoed so much. So when Fabian offered him this position, he goes, "Yeah, that sounds really cool." They came up with a new style of plasterboard that's there, and at the Opera House in Chicago, and at Radio City in New York City, and in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. that's still there, that was designed at Fermilab. Not Fermilab, Fabian's place. And and they still do stuff there. I got a chance to go in. I knocked on the door and was polite, and the guy said, "No, we don't give tours, you know." And I said, "Well, I'm doing this talk for you guys today, and I need to know something about it." And he wasn't too interested. Well, 2 hours later, I got through the place. It was really neat. And he said, "No photographs, and don't tell anybody to come over here because we're not open to public." Okay. But he gave me some samples of some of the research projects that they did, and you read these, and they still do. Okay. And you read these things and you go, I have no idea what they're talking about. You know, he said all of the easy projects that had to do with acoustics, they're all done. What we do are the hard ones now. So, okay. Fabian remained undeterred and found another acoustic physicist, Paul Sabin, who was the cousin of the other guy, to continue Wallace's research in the newly built lab under Paul Sabin's directorship. The formula for measuring sound absorption by materials was developed. Sound absorption by materials, including carpeting, wall hangings, ceiling tiles, and windows. Okay? And testing innovations in the reverberation chamber built by Fabian remains to the day an outstanding example of acoustical testing facility. There's Fabian at one of the places that were doing an experiment. He was fascinated by sounds. He even had a pipe organ that was broadcast all over the property. The guys there didn't like it. It was driving them nuts. Okay? Building is still doing research and all of that kind of stuff. There's the engineering building, still there. Okay, that's the acoustic laboratory. It's got a weird shape. Okay, Fabian bought unclaimed material on the railroad. It was just sitting on railroad cars, and the railroad didn't know what to do with it. Well, he bought a couple of railroad cars that were full of lumber that was 17 feet long. So when he got an idea with his builder and architect friend, he said, "Okay, I want you to build a lab for me using this lumber." And that's what they ended up with. It's kind of got a weird shape to it, but it's still there, okay? And it's been owned by a whole bunch of different companies over the years. Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT, took over after Fabian died, and it's gone through a bunch of different hands, and it's owned by a conglomerate now. So it's still there, and you do research. Fabian's legacy today. There's a Fabian Elementary School west of town on Fabian Boulevard. Okay, there's the bridge, the Fabian Bridge, that I drive over almost every day. At the end of the island is where the swimming pool was. Okay, people like to have picnics there. I forgot to say, this was the 5th forest preserve in King County. It's not me. Okay. The King County Forest Preserve District started in 1925, so you can see all this stuff, the 100th anniversary, which is true. The first forest preserve in King County was Johnson Mound, and if you want, I can tell you all about that another time. But the villa was the fifth. When the Fabians died, they didn't have children. Nell had two sisters that lived in Geneva. They inherited the property, and they didn't want to see the property broken up into small pieces of whatever, because it's right on the river on both sides. So they talked to somebody from the King County Forest Preserve District, and they bought it for $70,500, which was a steal, you know. And that's it. Oh, you recognize that? That's one of George's friends. Anybody know who that is? We had two King County colonels. Both of them were honorary. They were not military. They didn't earn it in wars. This is Colonel Baker at St. Charles, outside his hotel. He's there to greet you if you want to go up and see him. Okay? Now, what do we remember? Okay? There's Colonel's Gourmet Popcorn in Geneva. So I was going to bring some for you, but I figured I can't afford it. Okay? But you can go there and get some of the Colonel's popcorn. And thanks for watching. If you want to come up and see some of the stuff I brought, especially these things, if you're into science, you can read one of these reports of what they did, or some of these other books. I'd be glad to have. Or do you have a question? Yes, sir.
I have a funny story about Colonel Fabian. My grandfather, John Johnson, who lived up here on the road here, worked for Colonel Fabian as a groundskeeper for many years. And he used to tell me what a tough guy he was to work for and how he expected things to be perfect. And if you had a question, hold it, because he doesn't want to answer it. And I'd say, well, Grandpa, why did you work for him for so long? And he'd say, because he would always tell me I was the best son of a bitch that ever worked for him.
Great story, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? You can come up and talk to me. Yes?
What's with the bear? Keeping a bear in a cage?
The Fabians had a bear. They also had wolves and monkeys and alligators. In the greenhouses, the alligators got to stay on the floor in the wintertime because it was warm. But they were caiman alligators, which were short ones. They had a whole menagerie of animals, a lot of them, and the bear was one of the big hits. And the monkeys. They had two monkeys, and one of them was kind and friendly, and the other one was like a doorbell. If somebody came onto their property, they didn't know it, he'd ring a bell. Lots of animals. They both loved the animals. So, okay.
I just wanted to say thank Barb for videotaping, and this will be posted on YouTube hopefully in the next week or two. If you want to share with any friends, I'll have the links on the Books Between Bites website. So
good. Okay.
For posterity.
If you have questions, come on up. I'd be glad to tell you.